Hi, I'm Liz with the Louisville Free Public Library. Today I'm going to show you a project that we made in our January Craft and Chat session. It is a miniature snowman quilt, and it's something that we hand quilted. It's a lot of fun to make, and this video will take you through the steps of our process. For this project, you will need fabric in several different sizes. So the first thing you have is a blue fabric that's going to be the front of your mini quilt. We have 2 pieces of fabric that are 2 inches by 9 inches, 2 pieces of fabric that are 2 inches by 6 inches, 4 squares that are 2 inches by 2 inches, 1 white square, which will be for the snowman's face. This is 6 inches by 6 inches, an orange triangle scrap for the nose, and then a piece of batting that is 11 inches square, and a piece of backing fabric, maybe in a darker blue, that is 12 inches square, so 12 by 12. To make your mini quilt, you'll need to provide some other supplies along with your fabric. You're going to need needle and thread. So this is just a regular sewing needle, small size. The size is up to you, whatever you have on hand. You've also got thread in whichever color you like. For this video, I'm going to use a red thread just so that it shows up a little better and you can see what I'm sewing. We've also got some sewing pins, but you can use safety pins, whatever you have on hand or whatever you prefer. We're going to use 2 buttons for the eyes of the snowman, and we're also going to use scissors to trim the thread and fabric. If you have fabric scissors, that's better. If not, use what you have. Some optional things for you could be a needle threader, which is very helpful when you are sewing. That's optional. The other thing you might want to have on hand optionally is a thimble. So that helps protect your fingers. Since we are hand quilting and hand sewing, it is going to put a little bit of stress on your fingertips. So if you have a thimble on hand, you might want to use that today. So you want for your snowman face to have the 2-inch square pieces of fabric, right sides facing in the corners. And we are going to sew on the diagonal for each corner. So I'm going to use a pin to indicate how I'm going to sew each square to the fabric. So we're going to sew the diagonal corners on each of the corners here, so that when you open each corner, you have that shape, that octagon shape for the snowman face. So these are the seams that we're doing. A lot of quilters will use a thicker thread when they're hand sewing, but feel free to use whatever thread you have on hand. So I'm putting a knot in the bottom of my thread. I've already threaded my needle, and now I'm just going to remove one of these pins from the corner, and I am going to start hand sewing along that diagonal. So you want to make sure you pull the knot all the way to the end and it's secure. And then I am just going to do a very small couple of running stitch pieces through. And so you see that I've done a couple of running stitches. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is going to be hidden away. If you have a sewing machine, feel free to speed things up and use your sewing machine, but I also want to show that hand sewing is just as accessible for people. I know not everyone has a sewing machine at home. So this is just a basic running stitch, just going in and out with the needle. And I would normally like my stitches to be a little closer together just to have that fabric nice and secure. But if you want to test it, you can open up your corner here, and if that looks pretty secure, which it does, then you're good to go. So you're going to finish off this end by putting in a knot to secure your thread. You're going to do this to all 4 corners of the snowman face. Once you've sewn all 4 corners, and you can see that I did use a sewing machine to speed things up a little bit, you're going to press the flaps open. You can trim off this fabric on this side that you won't need, leaving a bit of the fabric so that the thread doesn't come out. You can do that on all 4 corners. And then use your iron to press open each corner. And I say press because you really want it to be an up and down pressing motion. When you're ironing clothes, you can do a circular motion, but when you're ironing fabric for quilting, you just want to press up and down. So this is the back side of the snowman head once the corners have been pressed open. This is the front side. So this is the look we're going for. This is that octagon shape of the snowman's head that we wanted to achieve. The next step is adding the 2 by 6 inch pieces to the sides. So these are your rectangle pieces that are 2 by 6. They are going to go on the sides. So you would do right sides facing, and you're going to sew along this seam here and along this seam here. So as a reminder to yourself, you can pin and then sew along this edge, and pin and sew along this edge. So once you have sewn those 2 by 6 pieces to the left and right side of your snowman, you'll want to press that open as well. But I'm just going to even up some of my fabric here because I'm being a little bit picky. So even that up if you want, and then press open the sides. So I've used my iron to press open the sides of the fabric here. And then you just want to take your 2 pieces of fabric that are 2 inches by 9 inches, and those are going to go on the top and bottom. So right sides facing, line up the edges. And you're going to sew here along this edge, and then here along this edge, top and bottom this time. So now we've taken the 2 rectangular pieces that were 2 inches by 9 inches and sewed them to the top and bottom. And again, using the iron, you will just press open the top and bottom. And that will be the finished, almost, top of your quilt. So this is the mini quilt front. Follow the steps. So now that we have the quilt top all pieced together, you can add your carrot nose, and the piece you may have may need to be trimmed a little bit. So you can decide how big or small you want your nose to be. want mine a little smaller. So you can attach this with fabric glue, or you can sew it on. And then once you do sew that on, you're going to take the quilt batting. So quilts are basically just layers of fabric with batting sandwiched in between. So the quilt batting will go in the middle layer, and then your backing fabric, this is going to be your backing fabric. So I just sewed 2 pieces of fabric together for mine, but yours should be all one 12-inch square. So this is actually going to go face down, right side down on the table, and that's going to be the bottom layer. So we have your top layer is your quilt top. Again, this carrot nose is attached in this example for you. Then you have your batting layer. Then you have your backing fabric right side down to your table. So this is your quilt sandwich. This is your top. This is your back. And you'll just want to pin all that together. Safety pins or sewing pins, it's up to you. Now that you have sewn your nose or glued your nose to your snowman's face and pinned the quilt layers together, you are ready to start hand sewing. So I would suggest picking a thread color that you like, that would be either something that blends into the quilt top or maybe something that contrasts with the quilt top, depending on the look that you're going for. For this video, I'm going to show you with red thread. Now, my finished product, I am going to pull the red thread out because I don't want red really for my project here. But I'm going to show you the hand quilting, how to get started in red thread so that you can see it. So the first thing to do when you're ready to start hand sewing is to thread your needle and tie a knot into the end of the thread. So I've doubled my thread and tied a knot. And then you can just pick any part of the quilt top to get started, and then bury your knot either in the batting layer in between, or you can go all the way to the back of the quilt, but then just keep in mind that you'll have a knot on that side showing. So if you don't want that, you can start in between the back layer of fabric and batting. So I'm just going to start on the side, but you can start anywhere, and then you're just going to get comfortable and start doing whatever stitch you want. So I'm just going to do a running stitch again. So you can see I'm doing a running stitch. You can kind of play with your thread a little bit. And then just go all around your quilt top doing this. So just kind of working the fabric back and forth, weaving the needle through, and then I get a nice running stitch going. You want to make sure you're not pulling too tight because that will scrunch up your fabric, so you can always kind of relax it a little bit. You can pull your thread just to kind of make sure you're getting a nice flat look. You can do swirls with the thread if you want. You can do lines. It's up to you. So if I wanted to do swirls, I might come back around into a curve. So now I'm starting a curve, and I'm just gonna continue and do this all over the quilt. This is gonna take a little bit of time, but it is relaxing and it is fun. Again, it is something you could do on a machine. That is one of the reasons that the batting is so long compared to your quilt top, is because when you're hand quilting or machine quilting, You want to make sure you have enough batting to come to the edge, and then we'll trim that later. So just continue hand quilting until you're satisfied with how everything looks. So as I mentioned, I pulled the red thread out that I was showing you because I don't want my finished product to have the red thread. So I am doing a white hand quilting thread now. And you may be wondering, what do you do when you run out of thread, when you're quilting and your thread gets really short? What I would suggest to you is to just keep hiding your knots in between the layers. So you can see my knots are always hidden between the backing fabric and the batting layer. And so the way that you do this is you just make the knot, and then they call it pop the knot through that layer. So I'll show you what I mean. So I've got my thread here, and this is an area that I haven't really quilted yet. So I am going to start by going between the layers to hide the knot. And then I'm going to do a little bit of hand quilting here. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a fun activity, I think, hand quilting. I'm doing some little swirls around mine. So I'm gonna do a swirl, and then I'll show you how I would hide my knot in the middle. The middle of a swirl here, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm ready to finish this part, but how do I hide the knot? So basically, I'm just going to make the knot on this top side here, but I'm gonna leave just a little bit of stitch length here. It's kind of hard to show, but hopefully you see that. So I've got a little bit of stitch length and then my knot there. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm just gonna take this needle, and with my right hand, because I'm right-handed, I am gonna make my next stitch. But with my left finger, I'm gonna feel for that between the backing and the middle piece and make sure it doesn't go through. And I'm going to, with my left hand, pull that needle in between that layer so the knot stops on my fabric, but I'm just gonna pull a little bit harder and pop that knot through. So now it's hidden, but it's also hidden on this side. It's sandwiched between the layers. For this next part of the project, when we're going to finish off the edges of our quilt, you're going to need some scissors and your sewing pins or safety pins, whatever you're using. So I'm just going to trim the batting layer only. So that's that middle layer. I'm going to trim that to match the edges of my square. And I'm also going to cut off the edges that are overhanging so that it's a pretty good square. But be sure to leave your backing intact. That 12 by 12 piece of fabric is what we're using to make our finished edge, our binding. So just cut off the batting into a square, and any little threads that are hanging off, you can cut those as well. So my edges aren't perfectly square, but now you can see that I've cut the batting to be the same size as the quilt top. So all I've left is that last layer. And on all edges, you're going to use your sewing pins to put the binding into place. It's a fake binding that we're creating, and that's how we'll finish off our quilt. So the first thing you'll want to do is, you'll notice in my hand quilting that my backing fabric square is a little turned a different way from my quilt top. So I'm just going to now very conservatively trim some of the backing fabric so that it's more even with my quilt top fabric. So you can see that this side of my backing is a little thinner than this side, so I'm just going to cut this little part off to even out. Don't do too much because we want to make sure we have enough of this backing fabric, but a little bit just to square everything up is good. Now for the instructions on folding the edges for your mini quilt. So we're going to do a double fold of the fabric on the top. So fold down once and then fold again and pin that. And we are going to do the same thing on the bottom that we did on the top, so a double fold. So fold up once. Try to make it as even as you can. You can use your iron to press the fabric if you feel like that helps. And then that's my second fold, and I'm going to pin that. And then I'm going to turn this and do a triangle fold in the corner here, if you can see that, and then a triangle fold in the other corner. And this is going to take both your hands to do this, and you can use pins to help along the way if you need to. And then we're going to double fold. So with the triangles in each corner on this side, we're going to fold once, and then we're going to fold up, and then we're going to pin that. So if we've done it correctly, which it looks like we have, you'll have a nice triangle in your corner, and that'll be a nice finished edge. So this pin is in my way here, so I'm gonna unpin that, press that down, and then I'm gonna repin that. Then we're gonna turn it around and we're gonna do the same thing. So on this side, triangle fold in the corner, another triangle fold in this corner. I've had some practice, but don't worry if it takes you a couple tries, you'll get it. So triangle folds on both sides, and then we're gonna double fold that fabric. So fold up once while keeping our triangles nice and neat if we can, and then fold again. And then just hold it in place while you grab your pins and pin that. So use as many pins as you feel like you need just to hold everything in place. I might get some more pins. And then we will finish off. The final step for finishing the edges of your mini quilt or doing the binding are to take a needle and thread, put a knot on the end, and you can use any thread color you like. You could do white again, like I'm going to do, but I'm really doing that so that the contrast will show up on camera here. So if you wanted to do a dark blue to match the binding, you could do that. It's up to you. So you're going to pick a corner and take your needle, and I'm just going to go through the binding and pull that needle through until the knot is secure, and I'm going to tuck the end of that thread in to the corner so that it's hidden. And then I'm just going to pick up the fabric on the quilt top. I'm not going to go all the way through to the bottom. I'm just going to stay on the top. So I'm going to go through the top of the light blue fabric and just do a running stitch. So I'm going light blue fabric through the dark blue fabric, light blue fabric through the dark blue fabric, and just try to make it, you know, look nice and as straight as possible. You can see my stitches are a little bit wobbly, but I'm not going through all the way to the other side. I'm just keeping it nice and up top. So this is a little easier to do when you're not trying to film it, but hopefully this gives you an idea about how to finish the edges. And you're going to do this all the way around. So you're going to go all the way around the inner edges, and then you can take all your pins out. You can take your pins out as you go, like I did, because this one was poking me. So feel free to take the pins out as needed. As you're doing the binding, there may be times when you need to add to your thread. So I've gotten towards the end of my thread here. So what I'm going to do is do one more stitch, but I'm not going to come up through the top of the blue binding. I'm just going to go down through the light blue and come up again through the light blue, but underneath where the dark binding will cover. So I'm going to pull that needle through, trim that. I'm going to rethread my needle. And then make a knot at the bottom of that thread to keep the edges together. And then I'm going to bring a stitch up through the dark blue binding, and I will tie these tail ends together and tuck the threads under the binding. So I've tied a knot, and I'm going to hide the tails of the threads underneath the binding, and then I'm going to keep sewing. So through the light blue, up through the dark blue, in the light blue, up through the dark blue, and I'll finish off my binding. And then to hide the very final stitch, you could do the pop method that we were doing earlier, or you could tie it off and tuck the tails under the binding. So I finished the binding of the edges of our mini quilt, and the very last step is to add the button eyes, and that's very simple. You just pick out the buttons that you want to use, thread your needle, and add them. You can hide the knot on the underside of the button, or you could go all the way through the back to the front. And that's it. Once you have added the black buttons to your snowman's face, you have finished your miniature snowman quilt. So you can use it as an art piece, a decoration around your house. You can also use it as a mug rug for your favorite hot beverage this winter. Thanks for crafting with us.